Good evening and welcome to Poems On. We're getting close to the end of the third season. This is the 11th episode in season 3, and our theme tonight is home. My guests are, as a new guest, Luke Stromberg, and my returning guest is Anton Yakovlev. So, welcome. Nice to see you two tonight. And let's get right into it. I like to ask my new guest to read first. So, Luke, what do you have for us?
Well, I figured I would start with this poem from all the poems that I read are going to be from this book, The Elephant's Mouth, my debut book. And I'm going to start with this poem called New Year's Eve. I don't know. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll just get right into it. New Year's Eve. It'll never be 1999 again. The photo on your old ID won't bring it back, nor the mixtape found buried in a dresser drawer, your handwriting and faded ink on its label. You'll never be the kid that made that tape again. That skinny boy is lost like a dead relative or an ancient screen siren, Art Deco sexy in a shimmering gown that was once all elegance. Though the past was misery once, we've learned to forget. Now it's a pang. We crave a love that's long gone sour, find tears for a home gladly left, grow fond of dolts. This year, too, is already almost history. Its crises, its talk show punchlines near obsolete. It's likely you'll never know its real charm until it's just one more thing that won't be back, like payphones in the mall or encyclopedia salesmen. You wait for midnight like Gary Cooper waiting in high noon for a train he'd rather wouldn't come. Your friends flushed with drink and smooching on the sofa, that strange-looking year printed on their paper hats. No longer thin, no longer very young either. You don't know who you're supposed to be anymore. In time, you'll learn, but you'll always miss that feeling of home, a feeling that you only think you felt.
Thank you. Displacement. Oh, by the way, I love the Gary Cooper reference. It's very, I mean, for people that know High Noon, that's a very apt image. Waiting for the train you wish wouldn't arrive, being the new year. Now, I've got to ask you, certainly the things that we lived in and through in the past are well behind us. And as you say, the young, skinny guy from 1999 is not exactly the same. And in this poem, you're dwelling on what hasn't carried over. And is there any part of you at other times that you feel is still that young, skinny guy?
Well, yeah. I mean, in a real sense, I kind of feel like I only feel that that person is lost when I start to think about it and look back on it. And but to me, it's all continuous. You know what I mean? And I haven't changed that much. I haven't really. I'm still like I live in the same area, the same house that I grew up in, right? So it feels like it's just one long continuous thing. Only when I think back do I think like, oh my gosh, I was a different person. I was in a different place, and that's going to be gone forever. But like I said, I find stuff because I live in this house that I grew up in and stuff, I'm always coming across stuff like an old mixtape or something, or an old notebook or whatever that's stuffed in a drawer or something, and it's still there, and it's like just hasn't moved in 26 years.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's one circumstance, and your circumstance is not mine, and it's
yeah,
not Anton's.
it's not most
And
people.
but what I'm always intrigued by, and I've written myself a lot about it, is the difference between thinking of life as a sequence, or thinking of life as an accumulation.
Hmm.
So, if you think of it as a sequence, you're not where you were. But if you think of it as your own character and your own experience as continually adding and continually ripening, the question is whether at the core of it, you recognize your same self
Hmm.
through all of that. And these are some things that I think we're going to be touching on as
Hmm.
we move along. I didn't. I don't want to hog the
I
responses,
feel like
but
I leave things behind too, like and you leave people behind, as you move through life, right? And
that's
it's
true.
just like, and you know, uh, yeah, you're taking on things, but you're leaving stuff behind, and you figure like, oh, that's never gonna, I can never go back there. That even just that moment is gone, and the world that you knew, the world just keeps going on and changing. It's gone now. It's just in the past. It's just something we talk about.
Well, we're going to return to this.
Hmm.
I think because that is certainly a strong and popular way of looking at it.
Hmm.
Um, and you have this special situation because you can continually be confronted by memories
I think
from your
so.
childhood because you're actually in the same space. Anton, you're in a different country.
Totally
I've
different.
left my hometown and I don't go back there very much anymore. Um, so it's there are different directions and perspectives. Anyway, I didn't mean if you were going to say something, Anton, please go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
You would only be cutting off my silence, but it's not silence out of indifference, but just silence out of thinking a lot about what Luke's been saying, and also just kind of projecting it into my own experience, and the fact that I, in some ways, do feel like the opposite, or at least the home, the sense of home that I had until I was, 15 years old is partly inaccessible to me because I really haven't been back to Moscow, where I grew up, ever since I came here. And so, some of my poems today will deal with that, sort of the effort to recapture that feeling or to go back to Russia in a way, like the Russia of the 20th century or of my childhood, even before that. But in some ways, I almost have to kind of semi-manufacture my own idea of
Hmm.
the place where I'm
Hmm.
from, because some of the details emotionally have become a little unavailable. But I feel like and the poems that I selected for today, I do feel like there are multiple versions of home and multiple ideas of home, and it's almost like there are characters, and they're also like myself as a character who may be there's a New Jersey Anton, or as I encourage people to call me Tony from Jersey, which is my New Jersey nickname, which is so different from Anton from Moscow.
Yeah,
And
I
then
guess
there's
so.
also like the middle part, which I was in Massachusetts for 14 years, lived in Boston for 11. My parents live in Worcester, Massachusetts. Um, and I go back there regularly, so I still have a lot of Massachusetts sort of connections. And that also feels like a little bit of a different identity than the one I inhabit here in New Jersey, outside New York. Um, so the poem that I was going to start with, if that's okay,
Please
is
do. Now is the time.
I think it kind of works well with Luke's first poem, New Year's, and this one is called Homecoming. Although, interestingly enough, I feel like this is a poem that is about the idea of home, but it's not necessarily my home. So it's almost like a character that I'm imagining rather than being autobiographical. Maybe somebody who would be a bit more of the same place than I have sort of happened to be over the course of my life. So this is called Homecoming. You enter somber into the old mountain. Enter with donkeys, with doting neighbors, with chiropractors. You march through the bars, a caricature of wisdom, a ringing bell. You craft a dirge, call down the pale rain, wash yourself in watery echo, take center stage and collapse. Each night, you become your own audience. You're confident you'll always find ways to thrive, though only as much as a crow in a coliseum. Austerity acorns collect under the sad trees until you drink yourself into optimism. The East River Ferry is rechristened as De Profundis. Brittle-boned pigs play football over your lifetime. In truth, this is all a storefront, with plastic fruit microwaved to look more alive. It's joust day, folks. You joust against your own faces. The fans place bets, but mostly bet on the waterfall that chimes behind you. Meanwhile, from up above, some deity sees the whole scene as a kind of gourmet casserole. You miss the people you miss, then hop on their trolley. Do you remember your first attempts at a tango? You pepper spray your best friend to bluntly welcome your autumn. Then watch forgiveness unfold its indirect wings. Your eyes tell the story.
Boy, no one has imagery anything like yours. It's so utterly personal. And it always, for me, it always has a cumulative power that I can't understand in a conventional way. In other words, I think I know from statement to statement, from image to image, what's going on. But collectively, there's a kind of aura that's created that's very strong and powerful. But I couldn't tell you how you achieved it. That fascinates me. Luke, do you know what I'm talking about?
I think so. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm always, I love Anton's poetry, and I'm always struck by his imagery and its wit, but yeah, it has a sort of, I think what you're kind of getting at is it's kind of like an impressionistic power to it, if I understand you correctly. And I feel like the same way. Like I wouldn't be able to like intellectually articulate always like what it makes me feel or something like that, but it does, and it communicates very well.
Yeah, what I love about it is that the components are so discrete. Mm-hmm. I mean, each image has such authority.
Yeah.
And yet, when I think of impressionism, I think of an accumulation of an effect produced by an accumulation of not so discrete elements, but layered, less defined elements.
Yeah.
And so that's what strikes me about it, is that it's an effect achieved in a way that maybe I'm somewhat familiar with, but not in the manner with which I am familiar. So it's utterly personal. I mean, Anton, you're not like anybody, and which of course it's possible to be lousy and not like anybody, but you're not lousy. It's so personal.
I think all like real poets have like that. They just have a distinct, like a personal kind of style, and like whether it's their voice and you have a distinctive voice too, or imagery or whatever, that it's just it's distinctive. It's just theirs, right?
I want to get to that. After a bit, I want to get to that when he gets to the poem that's a litany of New Jersey names and realities. And say, I mean, I'll say it now, but then we'll get to it after a bit, that another way of thinking of home is to think of language as home. And so you've got a native language and a learned language. Yeah. And so when I get to my poem talking about my grandparents who were immigrants trying to recreate the life that they had in Sicily here in what they call the old country, here in the new world, by hunting for mushrooms, it's attempting to twin up the experiences. And then I kind of get into, well, are they exactly the same experience or not? That kind of builds on the whole idea of making the language the home in which you operate. And people who read your poems are kind of welcomed into your home in the language itself. So anyway, that's where I come down with. So let me jump in now, because I have to come from a much more straightforward and conventional direction and read a poem which is really an anecdote from my childhood, which in past shows I've mentioned many times that in my hometown, for the first 5 years of my life, I lived in a tenement in the Sicilian American enclave in my hometown. And all of my relatives were within a 3-block radius. But then when I was 5, my parents and I moved to a park because my father became the superintendent of parks in my hometown. And so a 250-acre park on which the house that we lived in was situated afforded me a very, very different kind of childhood experience than I would have had if we'd stayed living on the hill where there were hardly even any trees. It was just a pavement. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Dynamite Hill. And this was a real hill in the park just beyond where my house was that was very, very steep hill. And there was also a less steep hill and a medium steep hill. So at the age of 5, I would go sledding on the gentle hill. And then when I got a little older, I would go on the medium hill. But the question was always, when are you going to get the courage to put your head in the elephant's mouth, so to speak, as we're going to hear from Luke, and go down this treacherous hill, which we called Dynamite Hill, because we were kids. We're not all that we didn't have great poetic imagery yet. So this is it, Dynamite Hill.
That's not bad.
No, it isn't bad. And I should also say, this is one of the only poems that I've written for which I've also written a song.
Okay. Cool.
Also called Dynamite Hill, but that tells this story in maybe a quarter of the words, but with music. And it's one of the songs that I have not recorded, but but it exists and I have it. So this is the just the words version. Dynamite Hill. In the morning, I went to the hill alone. I had green mittens, a black woolen muffler, and the hat my mother knit for me, gray with a red yarn ball on the top. I waxed up the runners on my sled, a flexible flyer, and gone out. I'd waxed up the runners on my sled, a flexible flyer, and gone out early before the big kids in the neighborhood got there to risk a straight shot down the hill. Other hills around were easier. My friends and I would always go on them. This one was steeper, and the runs were sudden. Only big kids went on Dynamite. My boots crunched on the surface of the snow. We'd had a thaw and, overnight, a freeze. The icy hill would be a sheet of glass. There'd be little I could do to steer, but then it would be over that much quicker. I reached the top, then turned, and looking down, I saw the sled tracks worn between two trees, glinting sharply in the morning light. The challenge was to keep between the trees, hit one, and end up in the hospital. I didn't want to think. I threw the sled ahead of me and belly flopped down on it. Flashing, runners shuddering at once, I saw I was already headed for the left tree and getting to it fast. I jerked the steering slat with my whole body and angled off the worn part of the hill onto the untracked surface. Gaining speed, I just had time to see a hidden bump beyond the tree and know that I would hit it. And I was flying. Then I hit the road that went across the bottom of the hill, flush on my belly as if I'd been dropped. I had the wind knocked out of me, but I held on until the sled came to a stop, far into where the rushes used to be, by the icy edge of the frozen pond, way farther than the sledders ever got. My head cleared, and I got to my feet. I hadn't wanted anyone to see me try the hill, and there was no one there. I had my wish, but then I had my story.
Yeah.
So that's part of what home was like for me.
Sounds. As I listened to that, I remember, thinking of childhood stories. Sledding. You had an actual sled with like a steering thing and everything. I remember we used to sled in trash can lids.
Yeah.
But you had to get the flat trash can lid, not the curved one, or we wouldn't go down right.
Well, right about the mid-50s, when I was a child, they invented what was called the flying saucer. Mm-hmm. And the flying saucer was a shallow metal bowl that small children could sit in. You couldn't steer it. But that was kind of the equivalent of the trash can lid, except it was smooth on the bottom. And you would just go gently down. Yeah. And so, of course, as soon as we could get rid of that and get to a sled that we could, it's completely different when you're on your belly looking at everything that's coming towards you. So that was the thing.
And you go face first. I mean, like then if you do crash into a tree, it's worse.
Oh yes. Oh yes. So that's sort of one of those moments where you challenge yourself in childhood. It doesn't have to happen in a home setting, but in this particular case, it did. And I have another poem later on that's also set in the park. So I'm starting out with the geographical version of home. But of course, we've already seen there are emotional versions of home, and there are more abstract versions of home. And the whole concept of home can be continually changed by the way that we want to look at it. So let me bring things round to you and see what your second poem is after we see what Anton has to say. I'm sorry.
Well, in terms of the abstract idea of home, I am struck by the fact that, the ending of the poem,
Mm.
I had my story, but the thing is, at the time, you had no one witnessing it. So in a way, we're witnessing something that in the moment was not okay to witness, but with the passage of time, you want us to witness it. But at
Yes.
the time, I almost want to ask you, like, when was the first time you told anyone about this incident? And I imagine that it wasn't going to be for a while. So, like, the sheer fact that, like, the separation in time from the event makes it okay to tell the story. And also, like, the idea of home as incorporating something like this
Mm-hmm.
kind of becomes more solidified in a narrative much
Absolutely.
later.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it needs the separation in time and in space and, just essentially the distance.
Yeah.
It becomes an idea through the stories we tell about it and through our memories, and
Yeah.
it becomes something probably than it actually was, really, but it takes on a significance and becomes something through the telling and through the memories. And
Yeah, that's certainly true. And you're right. In the moment, at the time, because however old I was, maybe 9 or 10, um, the fact that I did it without anyone seeing me do it
mm-hmm.
means that at the time, I put a value on the experience within myself. It was the kind of thing if I went to my friends the next day and said, "Oh, I went down Dynamite Hill yesterday," they'd go, "No, no." And of course, they weren't there to see it. So, so Anton, you're exactly right. And you too, Luke. It turns into a different thing when it becomes later an experience that you want to simultaneously relive by telling the story and also share with others who couldn't have been there at the time, and I wouldn't have wanted them there at the time because I was focused on my own experience, whereas later you become more and more focused with your connection to others and your wish to share your experience with others. So yeah, and it was many, many, many years before I wrote this. Even the song I wrote at least 40 or 50 years after this event, and the poem came after the song. So yeah, but yeah, no, you're exactly right, and this is part of it. It kind of makes a distinction to go back to what you read in your first poem, Luke. That there was a reality that's gone, and yet you're kind of recapturing it by talking about it, and that's kind of the thing that art allows us to do, is to re-access something that happened that we can't go back and actually re-experience because that is gone.
And but I really feel like I kind of feel like it becomes something. It is, you're kind of reliving it, but it also becomes something else because it's never like any kind of nostalgia that people feel for the past. You know what I mean? You forget, and it becomes something other. It takes on some of its own life. But
this is because we're storytellers.
Yeah, right.
And so you have license when you put an experience into a story to pay for the license with what you put in the story. And you can, maybe, I mean, it's arguable that even if we were to try not to turn it into something else and something more, we would not be able to go back and just quarry out everything that happened. Right. I don't think we have that within us. But what we can do is to make a kind of a counterpart that's, that has a reality of its own. And that's what telling a story is.
Yeah.
So, So, I mean, that's why I'm fascinated with the range of poems that we've got, because they all tell stories. And for this particular um, session that we're having, um, there's all such different stories that I enjoy that. So, all right, so that's my first attempt. That puts you up next, then, Luke.
So this poem that I'm going to read, it's less the abstract version of home and more the geographical, because this is a poem that I wrote about the town that I live in and the town that I grew up in. And yeah, like I said, it's like when you grow up in the same place, and I've been here pretty much my whole life, and you walk around, it's like it still looks the same. There's still some of the same people, but everywhere I go, and I drive my wife crazy with this. Like I point, like, oh well, this used to be this. This used to be here. This is where so and so lived. You know, back in the day, this store was here. Or, you know, they tore down this or whatever. And I see the it's always alive. It's alive with so many memories, and I'm still there at home, but in a real sense, like I'm in the geographical home, but in a real sense too, I also feel like the place I knew, it's not the same anymore. I'm still there, but that home is gone, right? But it's when it's like it's always being relived by looking back at these things, and it's lost and not lost in a way. But anyway, this is called Upper Darby. I'm caught in you like a swamp. You lie, a tangle of lives west of Philadelphia, a secret nobody keeps. Neighborhoods like Babylon's after its tower toppled, a flurry of different tongues thrown together in one place, where old Greeks sing in gardens among tall tomato plants, and Sikhs crowd the Gurdwara, confusing all the bigots. Hometown of row homes and playgrounds squared by chain link fences, of sandwich shops and taverns. Your train tracks and maple trees have grown entwined with my life. My uncle's squad car cruises out of the past down these blocks. It's always still happening. That empty pizzeria is where my parents will meet. Long Lane is still in its prime. I'll die on 69th Street in front of a Foot Locker or wig shop, clutching my chest from the heart attack that killed my granddad at the Exxon on Marshall before the flood.
Thank you.
So I mean, I could, you know, some of these, they're, you know, very personal references and things to my, you know, the streets around here, Long Lane, 69th Street, and family, my parents, of course, and my uncle was an Upper Darby cop.
Yeah.
So I've referenced a lot of that kind of thing. My grandfather did die at the Exxon station.
Really? Well,
yeah.
But yet, as always, it's in the particular that the universal can be found. Mm-hmm. So any of us that hear this can fill in those blanks mm-hmm. with the details that, you know, that parallel them, you know, in our own lives. And so for me, what's going on in this poem, and this is part of the complexity of your message in these poems, is that simultaneously you're trapped in your life, in your home, but also it has, you're trapped in it, and yet you're distanced from it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because what you feel is the earlier version that is all around you in your memory and in your imagination. Mm-hmm. And yet you also feel this inertia, and it comes up in the other poems too. That means we'll never get out of here alive. Literally, that's what the end of your poem means to me.
Yeah,
Is
well,
I
no
can't get
matter how I
out of.
struggle and strive, I'll never get out of this world alive, to quote the great poet Hank
Yeah.
Green.
So, but yeah. So that's the tension to me that's always there. That simultaneously you marvel at the fact that the present is laced with the past
Mm-hmm.
inside of you, but outside of you, there's this reality that somehow transfixes you, and in some Kafkaesque way, you can never get out of. It's like that Twilight Zone episode with Shatner.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You remember the one that I mean? Not the one with him on the plane, but the one with him and his wife that come into the town because their car needs to be fixed.
I sort of
Do you
remember
remember?
that one. Not as
Well,
well as I remember the one.
I don't want to retell
There's a
the whole
Man,
story, but they go into it. They go into a diner, and there's a little machine there that, like a devil with a mouth, and you put a penny in it, and it gives you it tells you fortune. And what you become aware of is they become dependent on what they're being told by this thing, and if as they keep getting answers, they're going to stay there forever. They're never ever going to get out of this diner. They're being held. They are transfixed. So that's what I mean. It's like you're not only unable to leave Upper Darby, you're going to die not only from a heart attack, but from the same one
Yeah.
that killed your grandfather. That's Twilight Zone stuff.
Yeah.
And it's also, the key line, which is actually the abstract line in this poem is, "It's always still happening," which has really stuck with me, because it's something that, like, when it's still happening rather than happening, it's almost like a shadow of itself, or a phantom of itself, or like a long tail. So in some ways it's like, you almost might want to get rid of it, but it's not, but it's just there. And in some ways it's kind of like the idea of mindfulness, of being fully present in the moment, or being zen, is contradicted by this. So like in some ways it's harder to be mindful at your own home if you've been there for a while, because you have so many memories, you just cannot be objective. And I
did.
I had an experience where recently, where I went to dinner with someone in my town where I live right now, but that person's parents used to go to that same restaurant, before they were born. And for me, it was like just a restaurant, I can take out, but for this person, it was like, before I was born, my parents were here. And that's like why I exist in a way, because they had like good conversations at that place, So it's like the idea that just like all the hidden layers that people have of the things that are still happening, which we don't know, like looking at them, they're just inhabiting a space today, but they may have, a granddad at the at the exon having a heart attack, and that's in some ways more real than what's happening in the moment.
Yeah. Well, so we're certainly getting a layered and a more complex sense of what home can be, what it is, what it can be, what it's like to be in it, what it's like not to be able to be out of it, what it's like to be in it and out of it at the same time, to feel like yourself and not yourself. All of these things are bound up, and you have this unique perspective, Luke, because you're actually, as Anton says, it's much harder for you to be objective when you're surrounded by all these things that confirm the earlier version of yourself that you don't feel the same as. So yeah, wow. Well, this is good. I'm happy with how this is progressing.
I guess
so. We're coming to you, Anton. Yes.
Yeah, I could go to the poem, Al, that you mentioned a while ago about images of New Jersey and place names of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yes.
I can read that one and maybe say a few things about it afterwards. So
Please do.
This is called Waiting for This Moment to Arise. Exit the parkway toward the field of wild turkeys, where your heart used to race so often in garden centers, prim. You browsed while in love, arms brushed against the breathing sadness of domesticated orchids. Cross the brook into Driftwood, have some molecular pizza, crash a book signing by a celebrated mountain king. Avoid buying his book. Buy a teddy bear for your niece. Wander into Dead Rock, where you can always swig a cool pumpkin brew, while eccentric contractors paint the town blueberry. Today, you're wearing one of your finest dresses, off-white with flowers like the milk of Kubla Khan. My direct flight from Porlock just landed in Teterboro. If you want, I'll give you a ride to Secaucus, jewel of the Meadowlands, land of snakes, show you the secret pavements, introduce you to the indulgent forger who set up shop behind the winery. In the borough of trees, I'll point out the house of the local doctor who invented American poetry with a fully realized epic about white chickens. Don't you want to shop for apples or ice picks in the birthplace of Bergen County? We'll pick at the world's most twisted angel hair carbonara on the edge of the thorn between the roses on our way to a wedding cake shop in Flakes. I'm not asking you to marry me. Silly. That shop sells other things, like that ambrosial cannoli cream I've tried at many a corporate get-together at the Five Domes Fire and Oak Lounge. I wear Beatles Blackbird suspenders over an Alter Bridge Blackbird t-shirt. I'm banking on you liking one of these Blackbirds. I would wear 11 more of them, but don't want to look like a Christmas tree. Instead, I think of places we could visit. Soul City, Little Poland, Soprano Land, Pasta Triangle, Soccer Town, The Grove, Bern, Bottle Hill, Pinko Town, Betsy Town, the Venice of New Jersey. Or, if you have a little more time, we can take a trip to Tranquility by way of the fluorescent mineral capital of the world. And then we'll reach Dingman's Ferry. I'll hand the buck to the man in the orange suit, and we'll watch the waterfalls together, hike a bit of the Appalachian, drop in on the Russian Imperial Chocolate Store, then drive back towards Silk City and Bears.
Wow. It's
Very
Dylan-esque.
evocative. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can see that.
It's like a second cousin to the way Dylan used language back in the day. You know, it's not a first cousin; it's a second cousin. But there's a connection. I definitely feel a connection.
Yeah, and there's
of course,
that wit
all of the,
again, and I think
no, go ahead.
that's Dylan. That's Dylan-esque too. Just like
yes,
the images he chooses to include and the voice, and it's an engaging, companionable presence. You know, I don't know. Very good, and so evocative of the place.
Boy.
Well, what's interesting to me, I guess, about writing this poem, when I wrote this poem, I had been in New Jersey for a while, but not for like an amazing amount of time. I mean, maybe like 3 or 4 years. So this is actually a relatively old poem. I mean, I wrote this maybe, I think 2013.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I moved to New Jersey in 2010. I lived in Bergen County. I live in Lyndhurst right now. I used to live in Ridgewood, which is called Driftwood by one of the nicknames. And I think at some point, like I just had this kind of fascination with all the nicknames, the place
Yeah.
nicknames that people
Yeah.
have, Soprano Land or Jewel of
Right.
the Meadowlands, Bear County, country, Pinko Town, Venice of New Jersey, which is
Yeah.
kind of where they live. So the idea was almost to feel more at home in a
Yeah.
new place by kind of um, learning about all of this local
Mm.
lore and the
Yeah.
like, the inside jokes and all the kind of things that people who are not local wouldn't really know
Mm.
about. So
Yeah.
kind of like a lot of the inner circle things that are
Yeah.
funny, and the idea is to make it funny and to make it kind of entertaining. But ultimately, like for me, it was sort of like I felt like I the reason that I was fascinated by that is that I felt like that was my way of feeling more at home, even though like
Yeah.
this was
Yeah.
becoming a new home for me. That was not, and
Wow.
it feels a lot more second nature. But there was almost like a certain sense of like defamiliarization or like a lack of
Mhm.
familiarity yet.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was kind of freshly arriving at all of this kind of this lore that's all around kind of the Bergen County, basically.
I loved especially loved. I was delighted by the Williams reference. Right.
Yes.
And again, I mean, like it's like, most serious readers of poetry are going to get that, but that's part of the lure of the place and the appeal.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
mean,
Yeah.
connection
Now,
too. And I read William Carlos Williams autobiography, and there's a whole chapter in his autobiography called Upper Darby, where
mhm.
really?
yeah, well, who's from Upper Darby, and it was a totally different Upper Darby then, was H.D. Hilda Doolittle.
Oh, really?
And her father ran, it's now a baseball park. It's called the Observatory Park. But at that time, it was an actual observatory. And it was owned by the University of Penn. And her father was like sort of stationed there and ran the observatory. And Williams and Ezra Pound used to take the trolley up from West Philly, which is U Penn, very close by, and come into Upper Darby. And his a whole chapter in his book is about that. But now it's like Upper Darby's like row homes, and it's like this kind of like gritty sort of urban place. But he describes like the lyrical rolling green countryside of Upper Darby, and it's beautiful.
Ah,
But
Yeah,
wow.
exactly.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
the same way that Lyndhurst, where I live right now, it's
Mhm.
bear country because
Right.
well, technically because the sports team, the Lyndhurst High School is the Bears, but it's also like probably when the city was founded a couple of 100 years ago,
Right.
it had bears. Now obviously it's like I mean there is a the Meadowlands are part of the town, so there are
Uh-huh.
actually a lot of animals, but it's like it's a suburban town. Um, but yeah, I'm part of the reason that I'm actually living where I am right now is that it's 2 miles directly down the road from the William Carlos Williams home and the
Oh
Williams.
Ah,
wow, cool.
I'm part of the um, Red Wheelbarrow Poets, which is also known as the William Carlos Williams Cooperative, and we have monthly readings. And
Yeah, I've seen maybe on your Facebook or somebody or Rick Mullins or whatever. I've
yes,
seen that
yes,
you guys are involved in that.
yeah,
So
Rick
cool.
Mullen, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
wow. Well, the you guys know the band Fountains of Wayne?
The Stacy's mom, right?
Oh, yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
Stacy's
Stacy's
mom?
mom. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's back in the '90s. But the I always like the name of the band, which of course is named after um, a place. Like some places sell cemetery stones. Fountains of Wayne sells outdoor fountains.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So So if you've got a big, a big spread and you want to have a fountain put in, you go to Fountains of Wayne. And I believe Wayne is in it's in New Jersey.
It's in New Jersey?
It's in New Jersey.
Yeah, because they've got a song about the Passaic River going, flowing by. And I thought, well, boy, the Fountains of Wayne is like the only thing that didn't get into this poem that has, there's a texture to the name. And that's what I was going to say about language itself being a kind of home, that you appropriate the quality of sound of all of these places, while at the same time you have your own personal reason for doing this that you talked about a few minutes ago. But for the rest of us, there's also this kind of a flashing display of names that are they carry connotations in the texture of their sounds. Yeah, so it works on so many levels.
It reminds me of driving on like the New Jersey Turnpike and seeing all the exits and place names, and I'm like, I haven't been in a lot of those places, but I know them because I've heard them in other places, or I've driven past the exits for them, and
right. I just like the Dick Stockton rest area. I'm sorry. Do you know the Dick Stockton rest area? Dick Stockton was a tennis player back in the 80s or the 70s and the 80s, and he's got a rest area named after him.
There's the Joyce Kilmer rest area.
Yes,
too.
Yes,
named after a poet.
Yes.
Of course, the Wall-Hagen Bridge.
Indeed. So anyway, that's just great, and you read it so well, Anton. You really add a couple of dimensions to it. I mean, the wit that's in the lines you make much more palpable as you read it, and you handle the rhythm in a masterful way, speeding up past end lines at appropriate moments that really give the whole thing a very, very effective shape. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to hear you read it, because I would have liked it on the page, but I like it even better now. So thanks. Yeah. Wow. Well, okay, so let's jump. I'm going to stay with my geographical center of the world, which for me was that park. But of course, every place is the center of the world and the center of the universe, depending on where you are and how you perceive it. So for me, at the foot of one of these hills in the park, there was an area that we used as a ballpark, but really all it was a big field that had two roads diverging, not in a yellow wood, but diverging left and right, that created natural foul lines. And on the left was this lake. And so there was a large area of marsh grass that grew to the left, down along the left field line in foul territory. That is helpful for you to know, although I do talk about it in the poem, but it helps you to picture it. So let me see. This is called Ben Trovato, which of course is an Italian term meaning well found. And there's an epigraph from Picasso who says, "I don't seek, I find."
I like that.
Well, and it does have to do with the poem. Boys, in the 50s, we played baseball by ourselves. We weren't organized. We wore no uniforms. No adults watched us play. You'd call it sandlot, but there was no sand. And it was in a park, but not a ballpark. It was a wooded public park with one green open space that stretched between a pond, a steep hill, and two forking roads that led out to a distant line of evergreens. Its natural dimensions fit our needs, but it had hazards just as natural. We had only one serviceable ball. Two others had split stitches, while a fourth was fixed with electrician's tape and had been walloped out of shape. when the game ball got fouled into the waving grass that stood on 30 feet of margin from the road that marked the left field line in dirt down to the pond's wet rim, the game came to a halt. We'd have to turn from players into searchers. Each of us would rely on memory and wade out in the grass up to our chins to where we thought the ball had disappeared. You had to find it quickly. As we looked and parted the long grass, our steps would beat it flat out to the spot. Eventually, it looked like pickup sticks. Your eyes became progressively more unreliable. The ball had learned the color of the earth.
Yeah.
You'd have to try to feel it with your feet, which was so blind that rocks excited them. When we would lose a ball, I had a knack for finding it. I'd watch it disappear and then go to where I felt it was. The grass would bear no trace of entry. I'd approach, and looking down, I'd see it sitting up a little off the ground, surrounded by the pale, dense standing stalks. A comet seen from close inside its tail. I'd yell, "I got it!" The game would start again. The ball would go around from hand to hand, a conversation carried by arcs of throws and slap of catches, a chatter kept up in the play itself. Later, I'd take the secret home with me. Though it seems silent, hoping to be found, a lost ball in the tall grass will call out to you. Don't try to look for it. You'll see.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's the Picasso sentiment is, I don't seek, I find. And it's a true thing. It is how it was. And probably will, I would like to think would be if I were to get my friends and go back down there and play all over again, although they're old guys now and I don't know if they'd be up to it. I still
Sounds
maintain
like
I would
idea.
find the ball.
A good reunion. I don't know if I'm getting the line correctly, but one that image and the line that made me stop, it just was finally wrought, was like the ball had learned the color of the earth.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that right. That's one of those lines and images that just it's accurate. I know exactly what
Yeah,
you
it
mean.
is, because
And
if it's an
memorable.
older
It's just,
ball,
but it's just also just I guess well wrought. It's just a good line and nicely put.
well, thank you.
Great imagery.
But it comes out of the literal image of looking at that brown ball against the brown ground.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not really, the invention is only in putting the words together to describe it. You've already seen it.
Well, there's there's imagery that works because it's like a clever metaphor or something, or and then there's imagery that works just because it's just finely observed, and it's there's no tricks or whatever. It's just like, this is nicely described, and I don't know if I'm babbling about that, but that's there's different types of imagery and that appeal for different reasons.
Yeah, I take your point. Thank you. It's a good point. You don't classify them, you just write them, but others come along and they classify them, and that's a good thing, because you're too busy trying to come up with the next one to think too much about the last one. Yeah. Well, so let's come around to round 3. So Luke, you're now.
Oh, am I up
now
already?
entering?
Okay.
Yes, you are.
Well, this is one. Not strictly this. Not all of my poems are autobiographical. This one isn't. but it's called On Being 26 in Your Hometown. It's a unrhymed sonnet. While stranded in traffic, I'll say it again. On being 26 in your hometown. While stranded in traffic, she thought how she was trapped, beset by cars of desperate commuters. The sun on distant buildings, a watchfire's glow. Beyond them, in the dreamed of world of change, a girl much like herself was making good. But she feared she might never move, might die there locked in her car, with Billy Joel still on. 3 crows perched on a dumpster seemed to wait. Well, anyway, she lived. Thank God for that. But that feeling of being stuck, stopped, prevented from becoming the girl she swore she was, remained all night so that she felt behind the wheel still strapped in for that long ride that took her nowhere and never brought her back.
Yeah, great last line. Well, here it is. It's third person, but it's still immobility,
Yeah,
being trapped.
yeah.
You know, she hasn't been turned into a giant insect like Gregor Samsa, but she can't avoid her fate either. So this comes back to that theme. Which, by the way, I wonder if those are the same crows that were in Anton's poem.
Hey, those tricksters.
Yeah. So since you have kind of covered the ground of personally feeling that you can't leave this place,
Uh-huh.
do you know why you chose to treat it with this kind of it's kind of a doppelganger approach that
Yeah,
she's immobilized, but she imagines this doppelganger free out in the world, free to become the
yeah,
real her.
yeah.
How did you arrive at that as an approach?
Probably because, I mean, again, you write and you write whatever you got, right? And
Yeah,
it just whatever comes out of you. I don't know. I All my poems take a long time to write. I'm not a quick writer. I'm not prolific. They sort of reveal themselves over time. But I actually remember this is the original version of this that grew and changed. But like essentially, like the ending, for instance, was still there and the same concept. I remember sort of why I wrote it and how it started. Somebody was talking, it was my friend was texting me about being stuck in traffic and while I was trying to write. And that's how it kind of started. And the way where she was talking about where she was, I think was on a road that I knew, and I just remembered the way that the sun in a certain time of day would hit the buildings, and you could see it like it was like it's these glass facades of the skyscrapers become like a pillar of fire or whatever. And that's, I guess that's, and then it just evolves from there. But like for me, it takes so long to I work on something, I come back to it, I put it away. It reveals itself over time. Whatever you've got inside of you is going to come out, I think.
yeah.
Right. So yeah, that's it.
I mean, there's so many different ways of working, and
Uh-huh.
I always say it doesn't matter what your way of working
Uh-huh.
is, as long as you
Right.
get where you need to get to.
I believe that.
Some people plan things out and do a lot with their conscious minds, and others let their unconscious minds do as much of the work as possible. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, I've talked about it in other shows, but people who have looked at Mozart's handwritten manuscripts say that it looks like he was just taking dictation, which just means that he worked it all out in his head before he sat down to write it down. Whereas Beethoven scratched out like 2 bars in one of his sonatas 32 times.
Yeah.
He kept going, kept going. Well, doesn't matter. The outcomes were great in both cases. So, but yeah, I was just curious how you got to that. And by the way, just to jump back, Anton, to your litany of, was it the New Jersey poem where you mentioned coming the milk of Kubla Khan and you arriving from Porlock. I really liked your mentioning you kind of got to be a fan of poetic history to know about the man from Porlock, but you just tossed it in there, and I love that because it's like a little Easter egg.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry to diverge from your poem, Luke, but
no.
But yeah, as I said, to me, it's the doppelganger theme that kind of got my attention. Mm-hmm. Because you could have done that whole thing with her concerned only with herself and her own situation, but to conjure up the idea of another person like you and yet unlike you, free in a way that you can never be free. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful image, and there's a lot more in there that you gesture toward it. And I think it's a great thing to bring in, but it can be worked out in a lot of different ways. And I don't know if you know well, I guess you'd kind of have to be a fan of poetry in German to know this, but
I know some German poetry.
Okay, well, Goethe had a poem that he wrote I want to say in his 30s, maybe his mid-30s. In which, as himself in his mid-30s, he's on a horse, riding, and another person approaches from the other direction and comes toward him, who is himself in his early 20s.
Yeah.
Do you know this poem, Anton? Do you know it?
Sounds like Anton knows it, maybe. But I don't. It sounds familiar, but I don't think I know the particular poem.
Well, it's not that well known a poem. It's better known obviously among Germans, but it's not one of his anthologized poems that are translated into English.
Yeah.
So you probably wouldn't know it, but the theme is such a strong one that for years I thought that he had a lot to say about the encounter. And then not long ago, I went back and looked at the poem, and that's essentially the whole poem. It's just seeing himself as his younger self go by him. And in my mind, I turned it into a big treatise on the nature of the older self and the younger self that reminds me of what you were talking about in your first poem, about how you're not that skinny guy anymore.
Right.
But it's very familiar. The doppelganger is a familiar theme and a powerful one. Is I guess what I'm trying to say.
It comes up in some of my other poems too. I'll probably read another one with a doppelganger. I do the same moves over and over again. I only got so much.
Well, we don't have to let on.
Yeah. Well,
when that's the case. All right, but thank you. Let us continue. What you got, Anton?
Okay, yeah. So I think staying on the theme of being stuck and being kind of, stuck. The next poem I'm going to read is called Centralia.
Centralia?
Centralia, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Centralia, which you may both be familiar with already. It's a town in Pennsylvania that had a coal fire that started in coal mine fire that started in 1962, and because of all the coal underground, the fires have been burning underground basically ever since, and they still haven't gone. So the town, which used to be a mining town, there were like 1,000 people there. Now there are about 5 people living there. There are like essentially a couple of buildings. There's like a church, and there's like something else, like a couple of buildings that just like stuck out of the ground and they're randomly.
Yeah, it's real. I've been there. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. So I guess somehow that kind of that town has casually haunted me, and I try to imagine a person that is somehow still living there, maybe in a ruin or in some, maybe one of the 5 people that is still there. Or maybe there were a few more some years back. So this is called Semprele. The laid-off miner counsels recent convicts and meditates on repossessed cathedrals. She can picture him by his window, becoming a parcel no one claims, a post-revolutionary's ashes. For years he chose her, or rather, her phoenixes dazzled him, and he was just honest about it. But now, all he does is puke the candied violets she sent. And the doctor's checking his vitals with out-of-nowhere thoughts of all his dead friends. He thinks of the fallen possums turning into mummies in his pantry. Some days, even the roadkill gives me up, he admits to the addicted abbots who thumb up his serial chivalry, but will be too busy when he goes off to refight the War of Independence. He is still her brain's pilot light. And if you think those fires don't burn anymore, wrap your thoughts in a shower curtain and wash them with the balm of Medea. The years will taunt her with upended hearts on hospital afternoons. She'll swim in rain and genuine absence. He swallows the note she sent and stares at his lack of ceiling. She didn't mean to scare him, but can't forget. Last time he pressed her close, he couldn't stop screaming.
Wow.
Great ending. Wow.
That is haunting.
It's just and it captures that place, but it's like a fresher, very interesting approach with the narrative. Yeah, it's wonderful.
So what is the relationship?
Well, I think the relationship...
Are we told, or and I'm missing it, or is it for us to infer?
I think it's for you to infer and make what you will of it. But, I think I was imagining, this person that, probably he loved at some point, and, she's still in touch with him, but he's kind of like stuck in this place that doesn't really exist anymore, but he's sort of still there. It's still his, but he kind of like almost like lost a connection to the outside world. So her presence, or like the fact that she would send him some notes or send him cards or, violets in one case, it becomes more and more unpalatable to him. And, he just kind of like stuck in his own milieu that no longer really exists. I mean, he does some things, counsels recent convicts, or, he does some community service or whatever. But essentially, he just kind of like, he's stuck in this place. He himself doesn't have a job. He can't really move on, but he's not really there anymore because there's nothing there. Like
there is nothing there.
His old life is kind of, it's kind of gone. So it's like, it's this idea of just sort of, being stuck in the past somehow while living in the present. And as a result of that, being stuck in the past, becoming more and more incapable of interacting with the real world and with the outside world, like really having maintaining human connections.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's really like, it's a very imaginative take on, like, well, who are these? Because I remember driving through there and seeing it, and my mom is and my mother's family is originally from not Centralia, but like in the area, so we were up there a lot, and I've driven through it many times, and you do wonder, who are these people who are still there, right? Because there are, like, yeah, there's like a few people. I remember seeing like a sign out. There's like, you see all these empty lots where houses used to be, and there's like a dead tree growing out of ash or whatever. And then like on a porch, I remember it was just kind of heartbreaking. You see like a sheet that says, "We love Centralia," like these people who could not let go.
Yeah.
And are there, and it's like, who would this person be who's still there, right? Why is he still there? And it's very well done.
It's so powerful. I mean, it's apocalyptic.
Yeah,
I mean, it's cosmic. It's so specific, and yet it transcends the detail and turns into this cosmic isolation.
Yeah.
It's wow. Yeah, no, this is great. And yeah, I like the fact that I have to infer the relationship, because the emotional quality is not impaired at all by not knowing, by not having the particulars of who these people
between
are.
the lines, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, even the things that he does are, hopeless. At the very, I'm going to look at it as I go back just to open it out. Counseling recent convicts. These are things that don't.
It's interesting. Why counseling recent convicts? I mean, even that feels charged, you know?
Well, it doesn't feel like it's going to lead to some kind of redemption. It feels like it's another short one-way street that leads to a dead end. I don't know. It's not a hopeful. This is not a hopeful poem.
Yeah, I guess it feels to me like the idea is to help someone get out of a bad place or a difficult past, but there's also the odds are against you, and
yes. That's what we feel.
Yeah, there's so it's almost like the effort to move on or to help others move on, but there's a lot of headwinds kind of like blowing against you, and
yes,
it smacks of Sisyphus,
yeah, and the same way, I guess, like the mummifying the possums in his pantry, and the roadkill, just sort of like trying to almost like do something with things that are dead, or do something that almost like promises to have some kind of rebirth, but doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, everything they all work together to create this overpowering effect. All the details. So, wow. Well, thanks for reading that.
It really does, and if you've ever been to Centralia, it really does look like the mouth of hell.
Really?
Like, oh yeah, it's just like, like a lot of it is like empty. Like, I'm trying to remember. Maybe you've seen it more recently, but like it's just these empty lots, like grassy kind of lots. But then like these fields where you just see like the smoke coming up out of the ground, and like ashy earth where there's nothing there, and like little like withered trees. It's like, it was haunting.
Yeah.
Well, and even beyond that, the fact that Centralia is this real place.
Yeah.
But if it were called something different, just the name Centralia has overtones of this is the universal truth. This is everywhere. This is the center of it all. So it's got all of these overtones that all work together. They all conspire to make it so strong. So I don't know, bravo. This is great. Wow. Well, so I can speak to some of the themes that we touched on with my next poem, but this is a much more muted, a much more delicate, if you will, treatment after this really powerful and brutal portrayal of hopelessness. I got to back away from it, but because I don't have anything along the same lines. But this does speak to the issue of present self, present life, past life, the identity that persists through the changes. And it's called The Ghost of Easter's Past. And this is, it is based on a thing that I did, which, as you'll see, I'm glad I did, but it's created some, it had some outcomes that I didn't foresee or anticipate. It's called The Ghost of Easter's Past, and I wrote it on Easter in 2013. And it opens in my own house at Easter. And I live alone, so I like to make a big dinner on Christmas and Easter, even though I'm the only one eating it, or sometimes I'll have a guest, but some years I don't. I'm by myself, but with this big dinner. And the other thing that is helpful for you to know is that my house, there's the ground floor, but then there is no second floor, but there is a basement that's a finished basement. So I live down underground and at ground level. So that's useful. The table is the same. My parents' plates and silverware as well, brought from their house after they died. The empty dinner chairs surround me on three sides. Set out before me, made by my own hands, this Easter dinner, a rib roast, mushroom caps and gravy, green glistening asparagus beneath a scattering of slivered almonds, brown potatoes with their darkened edges, all delicious from the surety of skill developed in the careful years I've lived alone. A German chocolate cake I've baked awaits its coconut and pecan frosting, ready to dress the single piece I'll serve myself tonight. The rest spread piecemeal later. I play for the occasion a recording I made in secret at our Easter dinner in '79. The family was large then, boisterous, alive. The extra leaves were added to my parents' dinner table, and all the relatives had come to share the afternoon procession of the feast my mother hurled for proof of love and power. Knowing, as they did not, of the recorder hidden beneath the window seat, I spoke hardly at all throughout, and hours passed as human chamber music, intimate, dramatic, unimagined by Beethoven or Janáček, was scrawled across the wall of the holiday, all caught by the machine. Now, from home theater speakers in the basement, the distant voices of that day rise up. The twisting, open stairwell lets them reach me. The floor ensures a separation. All the characters joined in the riot of parts below have passed away. A form of resurrection lets them speak again from memory, and only I remain to listen to and to extend our story.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so moving.
It's poignant. Like, so who did your mother really record guests like that?
No, I did.
You did. You did. Yeah.
I did it secretly because I knew. I mean, at the time in '79, I was 31, which means that my father and his siblings, he had three brothers and a sister who were all at this dinner. They were all in their 60s and 70s, and I thought,
oh, so you knew. Yeah, yeah.
I thought they're going to be gone, and I'm going to capture them now while I can.
Right. Yeah.
And I had a little cassette recorder.
Sure.
And I hid it. I hid it under the seat. We had the dinner was set up in the corner where there were window seats, and then the table, and then there were chairs put around the other side of this table. The same table I was eating at upstairs at the beginning of the poem. And so I had hidden this cassette recorder under the window seat, and nobody noticed it. They didn't know what was going on, and it ran. I had it on the slowest setting that you could get, and as much tape as I could get. And I actually taped almost 3 hours, because this is a big Italian dinner.
Sure.
We're there. We're not going anywhere. And it was I mean, the characters just, we're a very full of characters Italian family, and we're all storytellers. And so this was just
to have that all on tape. That's extraordinary. Yeah.
I had it on tape, and then years later, I transferred it to CD. Because cassettes are now, 40 years old. That's kind of dicey. But I still have these things, and this was literally what I did. I made the big Easter dinner, and downstairs I put on it was more than 2 hours, or I guess I had two different CDs. And so I listened to the past while I was having the Easter dinner in the present at the table with the silverware.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's almost like you could write about, it's almost like taking what you would imagine is going through your mind as you're reliving this tradition of the Easter dinner, but it's and you could you're remembering the conversations and the voices, but it's actually literal. It's there.
Yeah, and so now anybody could listen to it. No one else has ever listened to it.
Yeah.
But I made the poem as a kind of an alternative, so that other people could understand the feeling that I had. And the other thing that was, I think, pertinent is that I have a steps leading down into the basement and a very big open stairwell. So the voices would come up, and I have a very good home theater system. So it literally sounded like the dinner was going on downstairs. It didn't sound like a recording.
Wow.
Mm.
So talking about the doppelganger, and then talking about levels of reality and your present and your past. And as I say, I barely opened my mouth this entire dinner, which was not like me.
That's interesting too, that it's people didn't know they were being recorded. And whereas when you take photographs of something, generally people know they're being photographed and they're posing and stuff. And it's funny, you take these photographs and you're let's preserve this memory.
Mm-hmm.
And you are, but when I look at a lot of old photographs, I remember people's faces. What really gets me is I'm oh, look at that. Remember our old wallpaper? Or look at, you can see the rotary phone on the wall. It's the insignificant things that you don't plan on preserving, that you don't think of preserving, that years later, are interesting. When I go back, and if I find a VHS of something I recorded, who cares about whatever stupid show I recorded? It's the commercials that are interesting.
Yeah. That's true.
But when you record a whole thing and people don't know, it's getting stuff that you wouldn't think at the time to preserve.
Yeah.
But that's a real treasure trove, I think.
Well, I did think of it, and I'm glad I did
You
it,
did,
and I'm
yeah.
glad that it was successful, because it could very easily not have worked.
Right.
But it did, and I have to say, I don't play those CDs very, very often,
Yeah.
because it really is like immersing yourself in what's lost
Mm-hmm.
in a very, very palpable way.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as you say, they did not know that they were being recorded. And when you do take a picture, as Eliot says, you prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's already fake and put on. So this was not. It's in its lurid reality. And I love my family, but they were not uniformly noble.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
So there's some things that I'm happy no one else can hear.
Well, what's interesting about no one else hearing it, and about the way that this poem works as a poem, is that you wisely choose not to give any examples of what people said. And that makes it
Right.
universal. That makes it relatable for anybody. I can imagine myself imagining, recording something.
Yes.
Or, anybody, any reader can imagine that. And basically kind of like project their own memories, their own, Easter dinners or whatever situations into that. And it's like the sheer fact, the sheer act of it is what's important. And I think it's really beautiful the way that you describe it. Instead of giving any examples, instead of like using the show don't tell, in this case you actually tell, but with a metaphor. I think one of the most interesting sort of parts of the poem for me is unimagined human chamber music, intimate, dramatic, unimagined by Beethoven or Janacek. And that's the impression that you get of the whole thing. But I've never, do I think of conversations as human chamber music? Not really, but as soon as you said it, it's like, it completely clicked. It's like, that's, in many ways, that's exactly what it is. And that's really brilliant move there. And of course, the other thing that I love about this poem is that, the ending, extend our story, extend the story by remembering. You don't just go back, but you actually kind of put it in the present and move it forward. And there is something, I don't fully know what all the implications are, but the idea that, extend means it's in present, it's still happening, it's continuing, the story is continuing.
Yeah. Well, and it is, because here I am able to share it with you.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that when I use the words to extend. And the other thing about that ending is that it's a variation on the Ishmael saying, and only I alone am here to tell my story.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to not say that. I wanted to say something different from that, or more than that. And so that's how it came out the way that it did. But yeah, thanks for noticing that, because to extend was a very deliberate thing on my part, to try to connect that the reality I experienced with the reality of the poem, with the realities that could be shared in the minds of others as they think about. I think it would be quite natural for anybody that hears this poem to say, well, I wish I had done something like that. I wonder what it would be like if I could go back and hear one of those big gatherings. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. Talking about it as something that's in existence is more important than letting you hear the things that my Uncle Felix said, which perhaps should have been left unsaid.
Yeah.
So, yes, but thank you very much. I don't I don't think I've ever read this in public. So thanks for letting me share it with you because it does have legs that, that can walk into your own lives. So great. Appreciate it.